Yeah, hi folks. Now today I'm just going to play you some highlights from the StopCo governance event in Hamilton, the one that wasn't cancelled. But sadly another StopCo governance event has been cancelled, the one in Levin, but this time not by the council but rather by Maori radicals and a politicised police force. Now Lee from Cross the Rubicon covered that story yesterday and I'll play you some of that first. And folks, I've posted all the relevant links below.
Hi people, how's it going? This is Cross the Rubicon channel. I've just tried to make this video about 3 times outside. I'm in Sumner and it's just too windy and cold, so I've just got back in the car. Anyway, here it goes. Last night in Levin in the North Island, Julian Batchelor had an event, and as he was about to speak, I think it was about 6-7 o'clock, a full house was there and they were invited guests, and there was a scuffle at a door just as he was about to speak, and this is first-hand knowledge I'm getting from somebody else. 3 or 4 Maori burst through security at the door, and a very large Maori lady in a pink dress came in and shouted, "This is our land and you are only guests here." Now this is not guests in the building. She is saying you are guests in Aotearoa, New Zealand. That's what she meant, because you're not Maori. Now there was a bit of to and fro going, and Julian didn't speak. Police were called. One man in the audience who was an invited guest and he wanted to hear Julian, he was a Maori man, he stood up and he said to these 3 or 4 separatists, these extremists, and there's a lot of them. Believe me, there's a lot of them in New Zealand, especially in North Island. He said, "You make me ashamed to be Maori," he said to them. There was to and fro between them. The police were called, and the police turned up about half an hour later. 4 policemen, 3 looked like teenagers apparently, and the leader of the police was a man nearing, or what's been said, retirement. He didn't know what to do. None of them knew what to do because, well, you're taking on the Maori and your career is really, really going to be put under the microscope. So they decided to calm the situation down and let them sit down. As long as they sit down and be quiet, they can listen to Julian speak. They sat down, but they carried on. And so Julian called it. He said, "No, I'm not going to do this." So he called the event off.
Yeah, now folks, if you go to one of Julian's events, always be prepared to take a video of it, so that if Maori radicals or anyone else does this, you can upload it somewhere and tell me about it, and I will record it for you and post it to expose these people. Anyway, now to Julian.
Some chiefs did not agree to sign the treaty. They did not agree with it. And this is hugely important. For political reasons, I'll show you what they actually said. For political reasons and under pressure from activists, this draft has been hidden away from public sight. This final English draft has been hidden away. What actually happened was, when the treaty was made in Maori, Hobson said to make 200 copies of the treaty in Maori, and they basically put down the English draft like this on the table, and they said, "We don't need that anymore because we've got what we wanted, which was the treaty in Maori." Clendon has to write. Clendon is the American consul. He has to write back to his bosses and say what's going on. So he grabs this final English draft and he makes a copy of it in his house. And this is what we think happened. He went like this. He took the final English draft, he put it in his top pocket, and he said, "You know what? I'm just going to hold on to this for a little while." Littlewood comes in the room. He's a lawyer. And he says, "Littlewood, this is the final English draft. Stick that away somewhere. Just store it, will you?" Littlewood goes, "Thank you." He's a lawyer. And that document was lost between February 1840 and 1989, and it was found in a drawer in the house of the relatives of Henry Littlewood. It was in an envelope, and it just simply had the Treaty of Waitangi on the envelope. Can you believe it? Politicians got hold of that draft. They saw what was written in it, that it was perfectly aligned with the treaty in Maori, but it said some things that they did not want Maori to see or know. And so what they did for political reasons is they hid that away, and it's back in the deep recesses of the archives of New Zealand and has not been brought out since. Because if that was brought out, the whole gravy train would finish. Why? Because the copy that they're using now is not the final draft. And the Treaty of the Waitangi Tribunal has got a copy, was a rogue copy, written out by James Freeman, and they're using it, and it has mention of forests and fisheries in it, which this one does not. This one has no mention of forest and fisheries. And so they said, quickly put this away, hide it. And so the corruption started. What the chiefs actually said in the tent at Waitangi. The first speaker was Te Kemera, chief of the Ngāti Kawa tribe. He said this, "Health to thee, O Governor. I'm not pleased towards thee. I shall never say yes to your staying. Were we to be in equality, then perhaps Te Kemera would say yes. But the Governor be up and Te Kemera be down. Governor high, up, and Te Kemera low, down, small, a worm, a crawler. No, O Governor." He knew what sovereignty was all about. The greatest apologetic that we have that the treaty is genuine was the chiefs who said no. Te Hugh refused to sign, his reason being that it would place the mana of Te Hugh beneath the feet of a woman. That Maori present at Waitangi understood what was meant by kāwanatanga, which is sovereignty, is evident from the remark of one chief that if kāwanatanga, that's the Maori word for sovereignty, was ceded, he would thereafter have to ask permission of the British authorities to paddle his canoe across the river. These chiefs knew everything about what that treaty was about. Don't you dare believe for a second what people say, oh, chiefs didn't understand it. They did, perfectly. Enter Hugh Kawharu, 1989, the kingpin of treaty twisters. In 1989, Hugh Kawharu was invited by the government of the day to, quote, attempt to reconstruct the literal translation of the treaty. Honestly, the treaty's in Maori, it's clear as a bell. We have the English draft, the Littlewood draft, and the government of the day said to him, we want you to tell us what the treaty might have said to the chiefs. Shivers. He was a Maori, a tribunal member, and a claimant. This is like giving the ports of Auckland to the mongrel mob. And yet it was done. It happened. Hard to believe this happened and was allowed, but it did. Labour's David Lange was the Prime Minister at the time. Now, this is what he said. Get this. In Article 1, it says, the chiefs of the Confederation of the Tribes and the other chiefs who have not joined the Confederation cede to the Queen of England forever the sovereignty of their country. Now, that word sovereignty is a translation of the Maori word kāwanatanga. This word had been in use for many years before 1840, and Maori would have been very familiar with it. But Kawharu maintained that Maori did not know what this word meant. This is nonsense. They knew what this word sovereignty meant. How do we know? Well, we must look, as we have already done, to what the chiefs actually said on February the 6th, 1840, because these comments by the chiefs on that night and that day were meticulously minuted by Colenso. Then we have the Kohimarama Conference in 1860, where 112 chiefs met for a month. At the end of the conference, they moved and passed a series of resolutions. They were unanimous that they ceded sovereignty to the Queen at Waitangi in 1840. Here is actually the notes from that conference, and it says, look, resolution, that this conference takes cognizance of the fact that the several chiefs, members thereof, are pledged to each other to do nothing inconsistent with their declared recognition of the Queen's sovereignty and of the union of the two races. Also a discontinuance, all proceedings tending to a breach of the covenant. They're solemnly entered into by them. They're saying, we covenant not to breach the treaty. And look at what I've underlined at the bottom. The resolution was carried unanimously. These 112 chiefs, many of them were at Waitangi. 20 years later, they said, we resolve to tell you that we ceded sovereignty. Your activist person that you've just seen, the guy that I showed you, Maori didn't cede sovereignty. They're all saying it. It's BS. It's massive. And the reason they're getting away with it is because the $55 million public interest journalism fund, we should have 2,000 people in this room. We don't, because they're all being brainwashed. They're being brainwashed, groomed for tribal takeover. Kawharu's interpretation of the treaty is at variance with historical fact, with Saraparana Nata, and with the opinions of reputable scholars and academics. Yet his interpretation is being used by the Waitangi Tribunal as the official correct interpretation, the basis of payouts and compensation. $4.3 billion has been paid to Maori on the basis of Hugh Kawharu's translation. And it's fraud. This is the big guy. His name is Phil Parkinson. He is a historian and an archivist. His job is in Archives New Zealand. All he does all day is play around with historical ancient documents. He's an expert in New Zealand. This is what he said about what Kawharu said. Kawharu's modern mistranslation of Tino Rangatiratanga as the unqualified exercise of chieftainship is not merely erroneous, but it's preposterous.
Co-governance, the actual discussion, is tino rangatiratanga in the Articles of the Treaty. That's what the discussion is. And the actual discussion is when Maori are able to control our people and our land, it's good for everyone, whether it's looking after our rivers and our waters, looking after our community. That is good for future generations. That's the conversation that Mr. Luxon has no ability to grasp, and it's a bit weird that he went and made something that dishonours Te Tiriti here at Ratana today. Te Tiriti is really clear about honouring tino rangatiratanga of Māori over our lands, treasures and people. And so that's something that Chris Luxon will never understand and will never fight for. Surprised that he had the cheek to actually put that out loud here today at Ratana.
Tino Rangatiratanga, when she spouts that off like that, she has no idea what she's talking about. Tino Rangatiratanga was a gracious act of the British to help Maori slaves and all Maori to own property for the first time ever in their lives. And it really means that Maori, every Maori, was able to own their land, their possessions and their dwellings for the first time ever. That's what Tino Rangatiratanga means. Marama Davidson is an example of a history-ignorant politician. She herself does not know what the treaty says. She knocks Chris Luxon, accusing him of being ignorant, but she herself is equally ignorant. This is a case of the blind leading the blind. This is how we have gotten into this co-governance disaster. All politicians ought to have compulsory history lessons and not from people like Hugh Kawharu. The Maori word taonga means that which can be applied with a spear. So when a tribe embarked on a raid to kill, eat, and enslave another, taonga was anything that could be seen with the eye in the immediate vicinity: animals, women, children, walkers, implements, tools. Visible booty. Nothing more, nothing less. Kawharu fraudulently reinterpreted this word to mean treasures. That means anything Maori today in modern New Zealand, treasure. Thus the floodgates of fraud and corruption opened. Forests, fisheries, oceans, all the water, the airwaves, Antarctica even, and space travel. Now Maori are saying they own all the water, even the wind. Have you heard about that? Have you heard about this? Maori saying that they were the first to Antarctica, it's theirs. Have you heard about that? How many have heard about that? Come on. I mean, are you serious? Going down to sub 20 degrees in a feather cloak? This has come out of taonga. What is this? All Maori need today is to say that they treasure something and it's theirs via the treaty and the tribunal. What is this? This is just fraud and corruption. The only difference between the Littlewood draft and the Maori treaty is two things. The date. The draft was written on the 4th of February, and what was the day the treaty was signed? 6th. The treaty has the date of the 6th. This draft, the final English draft, has the date of the 4th. That's the only difference between the two of them. There's one more difference, and that's that at the last minute, Williams inserted the word Maori in there, into the Maori version of Article 3. Why would he put the word Maori in there? Think about it. I'm going to give somebody a little prize if they get this. Yes, sir.
Because the British citizens are already protected by British law.
Yes, we're already suffering sympathy.
Yes, okay, you both get a lolly. They said, these two both said they were the British citizens, they both get a lolly. They said the British citizens were already British subjects. They were already under the protection of the Queen. So Hobson and the Williams and Busby wanted to make it clear that it was the Maori people. They really wanted to make sure that they realised it was them who was going to be protected by the Queen of England, and the rights and privileges of British subjects would be granted to them. So they separated off the Maori people from everybody else and said, you know, with Article 3, you specifically are going to have British citizenship and you're going to be protected. That's what they wanted. I want to just talk quickly as I finish about the benefits of colonisation. Roads, medicines, hospitals, schools, police, cars, trucks, anything motorised, electricity, supermarket, food, outlets, clothing, cell phones, TVs, computers, aeroplanes, water that comes from a tap, dentists, modern toilets, government financial support for the unemployed, the disabled and the elderly. Everything I've mentioned and more is a result of colonisation. Maori arrived here as settlers around 1250 AD. When the colonists arrived here in numbers around 1800, Maori had not even invented the wheel or shoes. Now, one of the things I promised myself, please look at me, when I did this, when I started out, is I said I would tell the truth and nothing but the truth. I wouldn't hold back and become woke and PC. I'd just tell you as it is. The only thing Maori had developed in 600 years was, well, they hadn't even developed shoes or the wheel. That's the truth. It's not racist, it's just the truth. What the rest of the world had been up to, I was interested. In 1182, China had invented the magnetic compass. 1127, they invented the printing press. 1200, gunpowder. 1202, the abacus in Italy. 1219, windmills in Holland. 1250, the first gun in China. 1268, eyeglasses in Italy. 1280, clocks. 1295, glass in Italy. 1300, buttons on clothing, the Germans did that. The first sawmill for ship making, 1328. John Napier invents a way to calculate logarithms in 1600. The first slide rule, the British did that. René Descartes invented analytical geometry. 1642, Pascal designed a mechanical calculator. What's my point? Here are the facts. For 600 years, Maori did not develop or improve New Zealand. They could, but they didn't. In fact, the opposite. They drove many species to extinction and were self-annihilating. When the colonials arrived, and through hard work, innovation and careful planning, they built the entire nation with all its infrastructure, laws, government, hospitals, schools, commerce and systems. Everything you see today is a result of colonialism. To be fair, Maori were part of the building of New Zealand too. They provided vital labour. But none of this would have happened without the colonials. Do you get that? Now, once all set up, elite Maori are manoeuvring by stealth to steal the whole lot. What do we call this? It's the Great New Zealand Robbery. The British came to help Maori. In return, we are being robbed. I made up an analogy. It's like a businessman sees someone in need and reaches out to help them. The businessman gives the person in need a job. The businessman wants the person in need to be able to feed his children and look after his family. He gives him hope and a fresh start in life. Then the businessman finds out that the guy he tried to help is stealing from him and his business. Not just stealing money from the till, but stealing his whole business. How would that businessman feel? How would he feel? How would he feel?
Totally betrayed.
Totally betrayed. Well, that's exactly what is happening to New Zealand through co-governance. Elite Maori would say, you stole our land. Muriel Newman writes this, tribes did not lose land. Tribes sold 24.13 million hectares of New Zealand's total land area of 26.8 million hectares for substantial amounts of money. Claims about land sales before 1840 and about land sales between 1840 and 1865 and the sales through the Native Land Court are merely claims for more money for those old sales. Think about this. 24.13 is a percentage of 26.8. That's the percentage of New Zealand Maori sold. This is the total area of New Zealand. That's 90%. So the conclusion is, so Maori had sold 90% of New Zealand by 1865. They sold it. The other 10% was unusable Maori land like the Southern Alps. Conclusion? The land we are compensating Maori for today has already been paid for, so we are paying twice, sometimes three or more times for the same piece of land.